My name is Carol Presso, and it's my pleasure to moderate this discussion today, and I am really thrilled with the kind of reception we have. It says a lot about the nature of the issues we're going to be talking about today and your interest in these issues and your interest in grappling with the issues all facing us. So this is a virtual and interactive roundtable. You have in front of you a Q&A box. Please feel free to use that to pose your questions or make comments as we go along. I now would like to invite Susan Ryan, Vice Chair CPHR Canada and Chief Financial Officer, Nanaimo and District Hospital Foundation, to say a few welcoming words.
Thanks, Carol, and I'm very pleased to be here today to be able to do this and to welcome everybody for joining us today from every corner of Canada. It doesn't matter where we are today, we're all in this together, and it has been quite a year. But before we draw it to a close, we thought at CPHR Canada that we felt it was important to take stock and attempt as much as we can to set the groundwork for the new year. Businesses of all sizes and workers in all sectors, families and individuals are finding ways to adapt to the new normal. Things may have indeed changed forever. Many of our employees are hurting, and many businesses are struggling. Families are still grappling with balancing the needs of their children, the closing of schools and daycare with the requirements of work. Women have been disproportionately impacted by the recession. The pandemic has aggravated an already scarce labor pool and will impact businesses' ability to recover. Many are without jobs. Some industries can't hire fast enough. All of this, of course, is putting a strain on our members, human resources professionals who are working with organizations of all sizes, trying to make sense of all of this and build a better future for all. When our leaders say, build back better, we know our professionals are at the forefront. Today, I'm very pleased that we have 4 leaders in the field that will try to make sense of the issues and set the course for the future. We're also counting on your input from across the country. It'll be very interesting to hear from you, so please use the chat box, send in your questions and comments, and we look forward to hearing from all of you in the next 60 minutes. Over to you, Carol.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you. And it's my pleasure now to introduce our panelist. And from British Columbia, Anthony Ariganello. He's president and CEO of CPHR Canada and CPHR BC and Yukon. We have Rodney Miller. He's president and CEO of CPHR Alberta. Manon Poirier from Montreal, Directrice Générale, Ordre des conseillers en ressources humaines, Ordre des conseillers agréés en ressources humaines, and Laura Thurnheer, Associate Dean, Science, Technology, and Health at Okanagan College. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, as Susan just mentioned, to all of you joining us via Zoom, this is an interactive roundtable. This means you get to have your say. Please use the Q&A function to pose questions to our panelists or comment on the topic being discussed. We might not get to all of them, but they will be noted and taken into account when drafting our report. And please feel free to write in the official languages of your choice. So let's get this underway. Here we are entering the 9th month of lockdown, hitting the second wave with perhaps hope that a vaccine will be available to all of us sometime in 2021. Today, we want to talk not about the last 9 months, but about going forward. So why don't I turn it over to each of our panelists to make some brief opening remarks. Tony, would you like to go first?
Of course. Thank you, Carol. Merci. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us from coast to coast. It's a real pleasure having this in conversation with not only other HR leaders, but also our stakeholders, our members across Canada. It's a real pleasure. As you all know, this has been a really challenging year on so many levels, both personal and professional. But one of the things that this pandemic has shown, in my view, is that human resources has been held in extreme high esteem as the go-to profession to support stakeholders of all denominations, be it employers, employees, families, and of course, advisors to government. I'm really proud as an HR profession that we are leading the way in shaping this recovery. And I think we have a lot to say and a lot to do. So really excited by the time and the opportune time, albeit a very difficult one.
Thank you, Tony. How about Manon? We'll go to Manon.
Merci, Carole. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I think Tony mentioned, I guess the main element in opening remarks is that indeed organizations turn to CPHRs to seek advice and lead the changes in the last months, and they will do so also in the future, which is our opportunity to influence the way we're gonna rebuild these organizations. But also we need to also take care of ourselves. The Law just did a survey of its member and recognizing that a lot of you are exhausted about the last month, so we need to take care of us. And so we can move forward in the future. A future that is interesting because there's two different realities in the economy. There are industries that are greatly impacted and are not operating right now. And you still have industries that are doing very well. We don't talk much about them in the media, but there's still a lot of organizations that have a hard time recruiting and retaining talent. And so it's two different realities. And in both cases, CPHRs are obviously have the expertise, global vision to help organizations and individuals to grow through what 2021 kind of promise will be.
Merci, Manon. And Rod, over to you.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, wherever you might be across this great country. And as my colleagues have said it so eloquently before, this has certainly been a challenging year for us professionally and personally. And who would have thought 9 months ago that we'd be here today, continuing to meet remotely off of technology that we probably didn't know a lot about, but I can tell you I've learned a lot about Teams and Zoom and GoToMeeting, more than I would ever thought I would have known as a means of connecting with my teams and my community. So it's been an amazing time. As Tony mentioned, the HR profession has been central to organizations navigating this pandemic, guiding organizations through strategic advice into what is the future, and we will continue to do so as a profession. I personally believe that there is opportunity in this for us as a profession looking forward, and I'm very excited about the conversations we're going to have today around some of these issues as we look forward, emerging from this pandemic into what we're going to define as a new normal, because we will not go back to what we were, what that new normal might be, and it's exciting to be part of that future. So thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to the engagement in the questions and answer session, and please encourage you to submit questions as well today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rod. And last but certainly not least, Laura.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Kelowna, British Columbia. Pleased to join you this morning. I organized my opening remarks sort of into what am I worried about in this pandemic? And there's lots to be worried about, of course. And what am I excited about, as I find, like many, my emotions are going up and down daily. So things that I'm worried about is, as an educator, I'm very worried about young people between 20 and 35 and whose lives are possibly on hold and even their careers. I'm worried about disintegrating company loyalty and loss of corporate culture as people are away from their workplaces. And of course, as Susan mentioned, I'm worried about declining participation of women in the workplace. On the other hand, some of the things I'm excited about are the acceleration of the acceptance of remote work, the potential for a hybrid workplace in future. As Rod just said, work is going to be changing when we get back. People choosing to live where they want to live. I live in the Okanagan, and we've got lots of people choosing to live in the Okanagan, and our real estate market is booming. And of course, the new tools that are now available to us, both from education and from a communication point of view. So those are just a couple of my thoughts about what I'm worried about and what I'm excited about.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura. And what a great place to start, because I want to talk about, in our first block of discussion, about the workplace and changes that we might foresee in the coming months. You know, they say that in ordinary times, about 40% of Canadians are in jobs that can be done remotely from home. Two sides to this issue that could lead to inequalities between those that can work from home and those that cannot. The latter group has, according to some research, has been the class of workers that have most suffered from the pandemic, and their employment continues to be precarious. The move towards telework is not new, but of course, as you've noted, it's been accelerated. Is it here to stay? What are the risks from an organization point of view? what do organizations need going forward? And how can we bridge the divide both from a technology perspective and from culture perspective between those from working remotely and not? So big questions, lots of issues to be exploring here, lots of issues related to social aspects of work, organizational culture, gig work. I'm opening it up. Who goes first?
I can jump in only because I've been asked this question a few times by a number of media outlets and reporters. And, you know, again, nobody has a crystal ball to actually foresee and guarantee this is going the way it's going to be. But, you know, my own feelings are, you know, and I think Laura touched on it, the hybrid. It'll definitely be more remote work than ever before. However, it's going to be hybrid. I cannot see a future where all work will be done from home. And when I say that, I'm really obviously focusing on work that can be done at home. Clearly, certain roles you cannot do, and you've got to go in for example, manufacturing jobs, etc. But when we speak about certain roles that can, the challenge with having remote work on a continuous basis, and again, sometimes, you know, it's always about pendulum swings. When things happen, you know, we see a pendulum going the other way and say, oh, things are going to change drastically, and you know, for the future, it'll be a completely different scenario than what we've lived in the past. I think the answer is always somewhere in between. And what that means is there'll definitely be more. How much is really the question. But from an HR point of view, I guess my concerns is that if we don't have people socializing, that's going to be high risk because there is a need to socialize, especially in human resources. At the end of the day, we're all about people and not being able to interact with people. And even though we're doing it through technology, it's clearly not the same thing. We also need to ensure that we develop our people. So personal development, training, giving feedback, providing feedback, having that connection where we actually bounce ideas off each other. That is all part of a great environment in terms of establishing a good and strong work culture. So if we have all of our employees working from home all the time, you can imagine what kind of culture an employer will develop, which is, I guess, really a very difficult one to fathom down the road. So I do see something in between. And, you know, you said it, Carol, the problem is not everyone can work from home. Not everyone has high-speed internet. That's a big issue. Like if I were, and we have lobbied government to say, if they're going to invest money for, you know, people, that is one way we need to ensure that everyone has internet facility to be able to not only interact with others through work, through Zoom and technology that's evolving, but also to be able to communicate and get news, because so many people get news, as we know, from the internet today, as opposed to, you know, the old traditional means, which is newspapers and television. So I think that's really important. And of course, the challenge that I have seen this past year is that individuals have really struggled with, you know, dissecting what's work and what's home. Because if you're working from home, then that becomes your office and you're always at work. And so even though, you know, people are working from their kitchen table, some people only live in small condos and they've got 2-3 people working in it. Very, very challenging. So I think we have to be very cautious. There'll be definitely some, in my view, but, you know, I don't think it'll be a full pendulum swing. So those are kind of mine. So
thank you, Tony. I'm going to turn to someone else. We have a member here that's asked from an organizational point of view. They're talking about the suggestion here is that remote work may be inducing a gig economy or gig work. And so we're going back to the issue of what impact could this have on organizational belonging, loyalty, I suppose. Manon, have you put your pencil up?
I did. Thank you, Carol. It's interesting because I was going to talk about more the gig economy. I think Tony kind of highlighted in the future, probably what we see in terms of remote work will be an hybrid model. But we don't know when we'll be able to go back to an hybrid model. I think many months ahead of us, still 100% in working remotely, with the challenges it poses on the culture, the cultural aspect, and how you recreate the coffee machine, and also all these moments that are very important to build relationship. So that's definitely a concern. And I think more and more organizations are going to start to hire new staff. I think one of the reasons some of the teams were able to perform in the past months from a distance is because they had a history together. They shared something that, so the screen was not so much of an obstacle. But moving to the question of the gig economy, I think also some organizations were not open to remote work, and that they've experienced, and it was positive. Some of them don't have the same experience, but I think definitely there'll be pressure from employees in the future. Actually, recruiters are telling me right now that people that are looking for a job, it's quite clear that their top question or concern is, can I work from home or can I work from where? Is there some kind of flexibility with the employer? But in the same token, some organization, I think, just realized that they could actually hire people outside of where they have their main installation. So you would say, a lot of organizations have, had an history of having people that work on a contractual basis and they were not within the team. But I think we see right now, we see the trend is that organizations realize that they can hire someone that lives in Vancouver, even if their main office is in Montreal, which is interesting for organizations that are still struggle to find staff because they're in an industry that is not suffering and is actually performing. On the other end, it might not create full-time job, it might create more part-time job. And a lot of people might make this choice because a lot of individuals took the last 9 months to reflect on their future and the work they want and the balance they want. So that might be a great opportunity and a great match. But it might also, and we need to be vigilant in the future to see, will it create some kind of, these are precarity, I don't know if it's the right word in English, for these individuals not having full-time job, not having a dedicated employer. So for some, it will be the perfect match, but we'll need to be vigilant to make sure that we don't put these individuals in situation where they will not have the stability and maybe the benefits they used to have in a normal, traditional full-time job setting.
Great, merci Manon. Rod, I'm going to give you and Laura 2 minutes each. Sorry.
Okay, great, thanks.
We'll get more time on the next round. We get more time on the next round.
No, that's all good. I just wanted to expand on some of the things that were said, which I think is really the opportunity that exists for the profession. I was talking to a friend of mine a number of months ago, and he shared with me his view on this, was that what COVID has done has proven that work at home is entirely possible and it can be productive. But what's come out of it, though, is what is the individual needs of the employee. So every employee has a family situation, a certain situation that they're immersed in. So I think as leaders, we need to rethink even our leadership models around how do we lead others? How do we measure and manage performance when you're working in a remote environment? So I think those are concepts that are going to sit with HR as we begin to navigate the future. I've always been surprised by the thought of culture. And culture has always been kind of centered around a place of work where people gather. And I think what's changing here now is that culture, how do you engage people in the culture of your organization, whatever that looks like in the future, when they're remote? And so I think this whole concept and sense of belonging, whether it's from a DEI lens or just overall belonging as individuals in an organization, is going to be really, really critical for us from a productivity, a social good perspective, all that stuff as we move into the future. And quite honestly, I think that sits exactly center with HR to be the ones that lead that out into the future.
Thanks, Rod. Laura? You remove your mute. You're muted.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah. So I sort of working with a lot of young people, again, I'm very concerned about this lack of or changing loyalty of young people. And I think Rod just sort of said, putting the employees' interests first. So people are reflecting upon and relooking at where do they want to be post-pandemic? What type of job do they want to be in? Are they happy with their existing employer? So I think we are actually going to see a lot of people switch careers, switch communities, make complete about faces and what they're doing. One of the surveys that was done by Slack said that 72% of people want to do a hybrid workplace. They don't want to go back to what they want, what they had. And then there's people like me that say, wow, I really miss, or I want my 8 to 5, I want my structure, I want things to stay the same. That's what I've done for a number of years, and that's what works for me, especially as a manager or as a leader. So one thing I am thinking that HR is going to play a role in is related to performance management, because we actually have people that are embracing remote work and doing better work at home than they did at the office. They just have uninterrupted time. And then there's that percentage of people that were kind of worried about what are they doing, maybe support workers, and how do we manage those people? So that to me is one of the real challenges of that hybrid model of going forward, is that performance management and that supporting those outstanding workers as well.
Great, thank you, Laura. And on this issue of people sort of moving around and the hybrid workplace as you describe it, I mean, that has some huge policy implications. So this is very interesting. We're getting questions in, and I just want to ensure attendees continue putting in questions. We can't answer them all, but we're taking note of them. But I'm just going to bring one in, and I'm just going to extend this block for just a second because it was building on Rod's comment regarding culture. And the question that Jody Martin asks is, how do businesses, I suppose, build culture while being remote? I mean, anecdotally, I know a whole bunch of people who cannot do another cocktail hour on Zoom. You know, it's just sort of, and it's to the point I think Manon made about, you know, the water cooler. So how do you work in a team when you have so any quick answers? Yes, Rod.
Yeah, I think I'll throw in a couple of concepts there. And like you, I've had many Zoom happy hours and many Zoom coffee chats, and they've served a purpose. But I think fundamentally for me, there's two things that are needed to build the cultures of the future. The cultures away from what we're based on, having dry clean in the office or beers on Thursday or pool table, whatever, getting a little bit deeper into what is the value of what is the values of the organization, and do your values as an organization meet the values of the individuals that you want to work there? And I think there's two really core values that exist there. One is trust, and the other is vulnerability. Trust that your people are coming to work to do the best job they can in the environment that they're in. So that's really a leadership thing for me, is do our leaders truly honestly believe and trust our employees to do their best work on a day-to-day basis, whatever that might look like for that employee. The other side of that coin, though, is vulnerability. Do you as a leader exude vulnerability as you're navigating something that's unknown to you? And I know, going back even to my days in the very beginning of the pandemic, my staff would ask me, well, what are we going to do now? And my hands are like, I am not sure. We're just going to navigate this together, and we're going to be vulnerable about it. And I'm going to share with you, I don't have the answers. So I think those two elements that we often see as those soft or essential skills are going to emerge in leadership and become paramount to help organizations then guide the work, but also guide engagement, which ultimately is going to build the culture of that organization and what that new world of work looks like, whether it's remote or whether it's face-to-face or whether it's blended.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. We're going to move to our second segment of issues here. And a natural evolution to what you're talking about is, of course, the issue of the mental health of workers. We've read and heard a lot about this. And then last week, the federal government released a discussion paper making good on a commitment to include mental health as a key component of occupational health and safety, and will be requiring federally regulated employers to take preventative steps to address workplace stress and injury. I'd like to ask you to comment on whether we have seen an increase in mental health issues in the workplace. Look forward to our attendees to comment on that as well. And, you know, what are the key risk factors and cause of psychological injuries and illness in the workplace, especially in a remote workplace? And just to pile on to that, if you can look at what some of the best practices are being implemented that have had a positive influence on workers' psychological health. Lots of questions packed in. Just let's look at mental health and see, have we seen an increase, and what are those, what's causing that, and how do we go forward?
I mean, I can start if you'd like. Definitely, we've seen an increase this year because of the pandemic, but let's make sure we understand that mental illness has been with us for many, many years. It's not, you know, it's not new. It's just been heightened given the crisis that we've all experienced. So I think it's good that the government's listening. We've been lobbying, even as a profession, government to do more to ensure that they offer, you know, employment assistance programs, even at a government level for their own employees, but of course that they promote this with employers. I think that's really critical. We've also talked about the right to disconnect. As many people have been having to work continuously, there's no really end the old 9 to 5 doesn't exist anymore. And the fact that we are all connected, really says, well, when do you stop working? And the fact that you're working from home or remotely really, I guess, entices you to never stop working, because you see your office there, you want to respond to that latest email, and that certainly isn't helpful. But I guess what we're dealing with now, because of the pandemic, is of course, more domestic violence, things like that. So, mental illness does contribute to heightened issues with society, and we've got to be able to do more. One of the statistics that they released this week, which was very astonishing, was in Japan, for example, they had more suicides last month than they did COVID deaths. More suicides in a month than they did have with respect to COVID deaths all year. Now, one might say, well, Japan wasn't really affected that much with COVID cases. They did a great job. This is true. But when you look at the actual number, suicides are up 30% versus last year during this time frame. So clearly, this is a big problem that a lot falls on human resources. And how do we deal with that? And how do we engage and help our people? Because clearly they have a huge impact, not only to employers, but to society. So we've got to continue to do more and look at doing more and get assistance from government to create these programs that can support society.
Good. So just let me add a little, I'm just looking here at the questions here. This is actually one, and we talked about happy hour, but someone's asking about, is there any thoughts from the panel on the issue of drugs and alcohol from a work from home situation? One can think about many other issues that might be arising, and how do you manage that, like from a mental health perspective as well, when there's not the normal social norms that you'd have in an office? Just curious to add to this. Who's going on mental health? Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah.
That's an interesting point, and it kind of speaks to an organization's responsibility to ensure the health and safety of their employees. And I think one of the questions that HR is going to be facing is, as we navigate into a blended environment where some are in the office and some are working remotely, is how do we ensure the health and safety of our employees wherever they may be working? And do we understand the challenges that they face and challenges that they have faced in the past around their own mental health issues? And I want to relate on the point. I agree with Tony. I think that there's been an increase in mental health, but there's always been mental health issues that have not ever really been talked about or spoken about within organizations. And that has really come to the highlight here as we're beginning to emerge from what is 9 months of really challenging, a really dynamic environment. But we've offered the opportunity for employees to communicate now, to be open in those conversations. And so if we are, as organizations, going to be open in those conversations and genuinely listen and hear and see our employees for what they are, what they bring to the organization, we need to be prepared to support them. And I think the concern that I would have is how do we do that in an environment where we have to, according to health and safety regulations, where we have to when they're working remotely. So I think there's lots more conversation around this one. But I think some of the principles we can take away around this are, how do this? I look at it from a 3C perspective: clarity, communication, and connection. Are we clear with our employees in terms of what's expected in this environment and having them be part of the dialogue of that expectation? Are we communicating that clearly to our employees through the leadership structure that we might have within the organization? And then number 3 is, are we connecting with our people in a genuine, authentic way to show them that the organization is there to support them to do their best work? And that means helping them in issues around mental health or other stresses that might be in their life. So I think this is a really big nugget to talk about, and there's no simple, easy answer, but it's really up to the HR profession to ensure that we're kind of leading the way with this one.
Yes, Laura, go ahead.
Thanks, Carol. I think mental health has been there. We've certainly recognized it in the last 10 years and have started to try to address it in society and in the workplace. And the pandemic has just accelerated. I think we all know someone in our family or our friends that is suffering from some sort of mental health concern related to the pandemic. I certainly see it in students all the time. What I think as HR professionals we need to do is to learn better how to handle it. So very few managers or leaders actually know how to handle mental health issues. They have a lack of training. They certainly don't have a lack of compassion or empathy, but they just don't know how to deal with it. It's not the same. And they sort of are trying to dump it back onto the HR department. So I really think that as leaders, we need to have more training, more support, and learn how to support our people. And I think that will be a major direction that we can do going forward. And it's uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people.
I want to hear from Manon as well, because we've talked, and I know your organization's done a lot of work, and we've piggybacked that on the right to disconnect. And when you and I, Manon, talked about this issue a year ago, we couldn't have foreseen where we are today, where there is, as Tony pointed out, no barriers between work and home. And you know, we were on a call yesterday, Rod, Tony and I, with government officials, and baby crying and a dog yapping in the other word. But that was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but that also happens at 9 o'clock at night, and managers are making demands on employees' time at all hours, how do you manage that? Like, how many, like, from two perspectives, and we're going to talk a bit with the messages to federal government from a management perspective within an organization, but also broader public policy. Like, how do you set the tone for that?
I think when we last spoke about it, or it was last year before all that, I think that was the right to disconnect was something that was brought at different places in the country, was certainly brought up in Quebec as a law that you know, organizations should have policies, and there should be restrictions, so we actually know what is expected of employees. Our take on that to the government, our recommendation was not to write any legislation on the topic. I think it's impossible to come up with a legislation that would, you know, have a framework that would fit for all our types of organization and all types of individuals, because maybe as an individual, I want to have the right to disconnect in the middle of the afternoon because I need to go get my kids at the daycare, but I want to connect later. So I know some organization in Europe, I think one organization decided that they would just, you know, shut down their server at 6 p.m. So it was out of good intention that their employees would not stay connected, but it kind of had a negative impact that the young parents, they wanted to connect later because they want to have the flexibility. So I think legislation is probably not the way to go there, but each organization need to have a conversation in terms of setting expectation, be clear about it, and giving tools also to for employees to put their own boundaries, because sometimes I think it comes from the individuals. It's not always comes from the organization, but obviously the last months made it even more so relevant to have that conversation in terms of what's expected of employees and the right to disconnect and the right to take time for themselves. I think the question on legislation, not only the right to disconnect, I think my colleagues point out that I think our laws are in health and safety need to be re-looked at. There's a lot of question about employees. I have a responsibility to ensure health and safety, but am I to do so when they can work from anywhere, right? It's even more than home. It could be, you know, this like a cafe if it was open, but so how do you, so I think there needs to be some kind of conscious effort across the country in terms of looking at our laws, making sure that they're relevant and they give at least the answer, the framework for organization to know where to go and give some clarity. I think that the last, I just want to touch on the subject, the larger subject of mental health. It's interesting that the legislation will come into place. Carol, you mentioned that, you know, organization will need to do prevention on, but how, obviously they're going to turn towards HR professionals. So how can we prevent mental health issue? And I think we need to go further in organization and HR than offering of the employee assistance program. They're key. They need to continue. If they're not there, to can we make sure that everybody has access to that? But I think we have a role to play in terms of the workload. So we cannot control, we're not the mental health issues. Obviously it's more complex, but we have power on what happens in the workplace. So how do we influence management practices, looking at workload, what stresses people, and we have control and we can make those decisions. And I think organizations that continue to operate or are planning to operate in 2021 just the way they used to do, because now we're kind of used to working from a distance. I think they're making a mistake. So we should, you know, be ambitious, but be conscious of the impact it has on employees in the organization. And I think we're going to help the mental health issues. One last thing, I know I'm taking a lot of time, Carol, but
okay.
harassment for us is always been a concern, and because we see the impact, the negative impact it has in organization for many years. We've seen different social movement, the Me Too, that brought it to light. Interestingly enough, it's not because we're working remotely that harassment has disappeared, and I think we need to be more vigilant about it. Be able to continue to invest time in prevention, but also intervene. And it's hard when people are not physically there. There's things that you don't see and hear. We surveyed recently, I think it was a month and a half ago, and workers, and 1/3 of them told us that they would not be comfortable to make a complaint in terms of harassment because they're working remotely. They would have in the past, but now the context makes it so that they would not be comfortable in putting forward this complaint. So it send us a signal that we really need to be careful as HR professional, make sure we still talk about it. It has not sadly disappeared because we're not in person, some of us.
So let me ask a couple of questions that came from our attendees. And one was about work you're doing, Rod, on competencies. And I'm going to throw 3 questions out. First was, what are we doing to update the competencies of HR professionals to help, you know, to reflect this changing world? I'm going to add that too. On another question was from Jessica in Montreal. She asked, what are some of the leadership qualities do leaders most need to develop, especially during this time? And yeah, I'll leave it at that. So those are 2 questions that are coming in from our members.
I'll jump in and speak to the competency because I think it's an important one. So on behalf of CPHR Canada, and I'm working as a chair of the Competency Framework Update Committee, and we're engaged with all of our CPHR jurisdictions across Canada. We started a project in late 2019, where we began to look at our competency profile as a means of looking into the future and what are the competencies of HR that are coming our way. I have to say that COVID proved to be quite a catalyst for the project, in that a lot of the stuff that we were working on in the framework update actually came to fruition as we were going through the update project. And that project includes a view from here in Canada, looking at the Quebec framework and the current CPHR framework, but also the frameworks in the United States, the SHRM framework, as well as the CIPD framework out of the UK. So really trying to get a global picture of what does that future competency profile look like for the HR profession here in Canada, and then related obviously to the CPHR designation. We're currently actively in that work, and we want to, next step for us is to define those competencies identified in more detail, and then bring this out to our membership and the HR profession as a whole in 2021. So that work is happening, and what I can say is that COVID was a catalyst for it, because lots of things came our way that really were their part of the COVID experience that are now going to be embedded in the competency framework. So I'll leave the other question to someone else to answer, because quite honestly, I forgot what it was. Sorry about that.
It was around the leadership qualities that we're expecting of our leaders today in this, I think the word new normal, but in this new environment. Leadership qualities.
I'll jump in, and then I think I said a couple already, and I just want to expand on that. I think when we think about leadership, we often think about the old models of leadership that kind of was, you know, for everybody. It was an umbrella type model, and I think there's a couple that have come up that I think are really important for us to think about from the perspective of embedding good leadership practice within the organizations. I think leaders who are vulnerable and authentic as people are going to be important in the future. Leaders who build trust with their teams and with their organization as a whole, that you are who you are, and the integrity piece on that one's important. I think leaders who put people first, but also understand the elements of the business and what the business is trying to achieve. And I think that's a huge opportunity for HR as we move forward, is understanding the business operations in such a way that you're able to add value to that through the people function. And then I think there's a common thread here that we've talked about already, is that whole element around communication and ensuring that communication is open and transparent, not only when issues arise, but also on an ongoing basis as part of embedded into the culture of the organization, that open communications exists there. So I'll leave that there and let's let Manon, because I know she wanted to jump in. My apologies, Manon.
No, actually, you said it beautifully and in a better English than mine, so it's perfect. But I was going to actually talk about, we know that leaders that in the past month have had success in bringing their team are the leaders that show trust, empathy, and some of the other qualities that you highlighted. So I think the leadership qualities are a lot about the human, I would say, the human abilities. My question to HR professionals is that going, the fact that we talk about leadership like this, will that change in the future the profile that we're going to be looking for in leaders? Are we going to be able to help organizations move away from promoting the best technician there was and to become the leader of a team, and maybe not have someone who has all the knowledge that, you know, the technical knowledge, depending on your industry, to lead a team, but really focus on these human abilities or competencies of communication and empathy. I think we know it, we've said it for years, but I'm not sure I see it in organization, but hopefully we'll see it in the future, that we will be hiring people for those competencies that are so key to support team across the country.
So those soft skills are not so soft anymore. They've become the real hard skills. And Laura.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I really have to agree with Manon there. I think the leadership profile is going to change substantially, and it's going to be more about leaders that have the ability to bring out the best in their people. So those that can figure out ways to promote collaboration and work in a remote environment, or at least a virtual environment. Those that can, you know, trust their employees, but still, you know, urge and cajole and positively bring out the best in those employees and make those employees feel valued. So I totally agree. We're going to move away from who is the, you know, the best in that industry specific area to who is really the best person and individual to lead a team of individuals. And I'm actually excited about that. I think there's lots of opportunities for women. There's lots of opportunities for equity there. There's lots of inclusion there. There's lots of different opinions and different abilities that we haven't really recognized as mainstream. So I'm quite excited about bringing in some new leaders.
Thank you.
And I was going to add to that, you know, in the old days, or I should say even, you know, years ago, HR spoke a lot about having emotional EQ, emotional quotient, high EQ skills, emotional intelligence. Let's ensure that when we interview people, they've got that softer side. And I think now more than ever, that's arisen to the top in terms of, given this pandemic, visibility about people and leadership and those individuals that have really been able to lead organizations. And, you know, case in point, Deloitte, which is a huge organization around the world, not only in accounting, but also in consulting, etc. They have decided, for example, that they are no longer seeking necessarily the hard skills and looking at university degrees and diplomas and professional degrees. They're really going to look at the whole package, including the softer skills, you can call them that, both from an empathy point of view and leadership and so on. So I think we're making headway in that front, and that's clearly something that we should be really excited about.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Let's move to our third issue. This is, I want to talk about attracting, engaging, developing talent, ensuring diversity and inclusion in the workplace in this new environment. And I'm going to start it with a question from André Rousseau from Verdun, who sent this in advance. And his question touches specifically on the issue of diversity. And he's asking, with changes in recruitment, using video conferencing, remote skills assessment seem to favor a certain class of workers. How can employers maintain equal opportunity, equity, and the secure transmission of documents, especially when recruiting internationally? And access to technology may certainly advantage certain candidates over others. So some big issues here. What's your experience? What are your members saying? How do you face this? And just as an aside, Louise Arbour, a well-known justice, said last week, and she wasn't the first one to put this forward, is perhaps the time has come to have no-name resumes. People submit nameless resumes to ensure more, to level the playing field if you want a job in the job market. Manon.
Oh, you touched on the little button.
Oh, good. I hope I'm controversial, because some of the people in the comments are saying I'm a bit too not enough controversial.
Yeah, so I will. I know the chair of my board is listening, so I will state that. I will state that this is my opinion and not the organization. But I think the idea of the no-name resume is kind of is against what we're trying to do. You're trying to foster diversity, value diversity for the richness it brings to the organization, and yet the solution that is put forward, and I understand why. There's been, we've heard it all, organizations that send the same resume with the name that had a different connotation and the one that's local, and they have more interviews, and that's a preoccupation that we need to work, and we need to realize that this is happening. But I don't think by hiding names on the CV or where you had your experience actually serve the purpose of valuing diversity. I think we're just trying, it's just like a Band-Aid on something, and I don't even know if it's a Band-Aid, if it helps anything. So the question about the video CV now, it's interesting. I haven't seen any data to answer to Monsieur Rousseau's question, who lives in the beautiful town of Verdun, and I do too. So, I don't know. I haven't seen any data so far that shows that it helps certain groups or it's not favorable to certain groups. We see it more and more. And 3 years ago, I think the Lord was approached by an organization saying, we have this resume, people can actually apply and have a little video. And we were all concerned, would that be helpful? Will that help stop discrimination or not? I haven't seen any data, but I think it's the way of the future. So I don't think it's gonna stop. I think actually it might serve to stop some stereotypes that some people still have about different groups. So I'm hopeful that it will be a solution. And one last note, sometimes when you talk about discrimination in hiring, one of the solutions that is put forward is artificial intelligence, which is maybe a way to go, but we need to be careful when we use artificial intelligence to help us make decisions. So if your solution of artificial intelligence makes the work and suggests to you that 5 or 10 top candidate for your position, what kind of assurance that you have that the data that is feeding this artificial intelligence is actually unbiased? And we know that the Google of this world have tried that, and they realized that actually they took their top performers to create that artificial intelligence to help them in recruitment, and most of them were males. So they actually, this technology that was supposed to take away some bias actually reinforced the bias that were already there, and women cannot actually make their way through the hiring process. So I think as an HR professional, we have the responsibility to know what tools we use and make sure that they're unbiased.
Anyone else want to jump in? Laura?
Yeah, I'll take it. Thank you, Manon. I mean, I sort of take it a different direction. As far as attracting employees and quality of individual, I actually think that the technology and the pandemic has actually allowed us to expand the pool. I'm hiring professors now from other communities who are teaching remotely for me online that I would never have the ability to bring into, the interior of BC. I'm attracting students who are taking our courses because we're known for the high quality of our professors. I've got students from the Northwest Territories taking some of our courses. So I think from a pool point of view, I actually have a better opportunity as a small employer to attract better people. And I'm excited about that. And I hope we save some of that. So I think I'm opening up more of the country, more of the world for my employer to be able to attract better people. So, and as you know, we have a shortage of high quality individuals or qualified individuals, however we want to phrase it. I'm now looking abroad and further. So I'm excited about that.
So I got a message from André, who posed the question, and one aspect of his questions that I might have overlooked a bit too quickly was the issue of what I call the digital divide. And that goes through all the issues, of course, of work at home that we started with on staff, but especially in the context of interviewing. Poor internet access is an issue for many. I mean, it's an issue for small businesses working out of Rimouski. I mean, it's an issue, but it's an issue in terms of recruitment when there is not sufficient widespread broadband throughout the country, especially in a country like Canada. Comments on that?
So I'll just make a comment and then a few more. I think that becomes, when we think about the role that government can play in terms of ensuring that the infrastructure across the nation is into the future. And I would look at that as a challenge to the government to say, on a federal basis, to make sure that we are inclusive and that we want to encourage people from all parts of Canada to be able to participate in the workforce and not have to be constrained or left out when it comes to IT challenges that people might have. So I think there's some elements of that from an infrastructure perspective. I think there's also elements from a training perspective that the federal government can ensure that there are training programs in place for people to reskill or skill up in these areas that are going to help them find work remotely, whatever that might be. So I think that this is kind of when we start getting into what the government can do to help support this, because this is moving forward. I mean, we're not moving back to an office environment entirely. We want to encourage people from other parts of Canada to participate in the workforce. And if there's opportunities for them, so I think we need to make sure that the government's aware of that. The second
so Rod,
point
I'm going to ask, so
sir.
Thanks for introducing our next topic. Let's go down that road. Let's go down and what can governments do, or what key messages should we be delivering to government, to stakeholders, and to the profession? And that's you hit it right on the nail. That's a big one as well. But I interrupted you, I think.
No, it's good. I think I was reflecting on this one a little bit, and I give credit to the government for doing what they felt was important to do at the time, and I'm reflecting on the CERB as an example, and I think the CERB was something that was needed. It was something that kind of kept society going, kept people employed, but it's not a sustainable model, and so I think what I would like to see from the government, whether it's provincial or federal, is what are the infrastructure needs for sustainability? And if we look back at the example of the conversation around IT infrastructure with Wi-Fi, an example across the country, when you do those type of things as a government, you're democratizing education, you're democratizing the ability for people to participate in the workforce because they now can engage. So rather than throwing money at individuals, I'd like to see the government funnel money into the infrastructure challenges that are going to set us up as we move into this future world of work.
Great, thanks. And yeah, Laura, so now just to be clear what we're talking about the key messages, government, stakeholder, including groups representing employers and labor, and what key message do we have for the HR profession? So yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Thank you. I think one of the key roles for government is going to be continuing to infuse capital or money into the economy, which they're doing. But for me, it's going to be retraining. They talk about 40% of the population not fitting anymore. Sorry, 40% of workers, that are in support roles not having jobs. So, if we're all not going downtown in these major centers, we're not going to the coffee shop every day, we're not doing the things that we do, we're not parking, etc. So there's going to be a lot of retraining. So we're going to have to put a focus on how are we going to retrain people into jobs. And of course, as an educator, that's something that I work at every day. And when you talk about the digital divide, there's a number of individuals that don't have the technological abilities. So, most of us are scrambling to learn new tools every day. We all laugh now that we know how to use so many different types of video conference tools. But in fact, we're the lucky ones that we have the ability to quickly learn. There's quite a chunk of the population that can't. So I think the government needs to support that lower end worker with retraining through education and programming, as well as continuing to, even though we're going into debt, we have to infuse money into the economy to support small, medium size and large business to keep some of these industries alive, like tourism and hospitality and our restaurants, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I may, I'll touch on that. I think Laura and Rod both talked about, the skills shortage that we continue to face down the road because we have different roles, within our sectors, within our work sectors and industries, et cetera. So that's clearly a huge gap that we need to work on, and government needs to invest in that, as well as the infrastructure. And I'm really happy to say that we as a profession, CPHR, have lobbied government in the last couple of years to ensure that there is an infrastructure across Canada equal to all people in terms of being able to connect at a very low cost so that everyone is actually treated equally. So that's really important. And so our voices, as much as, sometimes, they may not resonate, they have been resonating. And we've seen many of our recommendations being adopted by the federal government and the Minister of Finance, and we have to continue to do so, clamber away. But I'm going to take a little different tack with respect to what government has done. As HR leaders, we have to also step back and say, well, what is this going to mean down the road to, our social economic environment and people in general? I am concerned that, although the government has continued to spend, and rightly so in many instances, they've had to support the economy. But when I look at some of the statistics, including yesterday's announcement that Canada has a $387 billion deficit. When you look at the deficit as a percentage of GDP, Canada ranks last in the top G20. In other words, we're the worst country in the top G20. That is a concern for me as a taxpayer. It's a concern for me in terms of what that will have as an effect to the individual and in terms of our future population, our kids, our children, in terms of having to pay down that debt. Now, many will say, well, interest rates are low, so the debt is not really a concern. But as we saw, or many of you might be too young, but about 30 years ago, our debt levels were very, very high, and bond rating services, really started to rank Canada as a very poor country in terms of actually lending, which meant interest rates might rise. And if interest rates rise, that will take a toll on the economy as well. So I would really look at the government to create a think tank or support groups to really look at how do we get out of this, also not only from an investment point of view, but paying down this debt, because this is clearly something that if we don't get out of, could create really bigger problems for the economy and for employers and for employees and the general population. So I am concerned around that.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. So what would you like to tell the HR profession? I mean, what are, in terms of what are the opportunities moving forward, and what can each of us do?
Carol, I love this question because I've said it many times, and that is rise up, take center stage, own it, help create the path to recovery. Don't wait to be asked. Move forward, take that leadership position, offer guidance, and take control of it. That's really what I would say. It's our time to shine.
I see a lot of nods there. Anybody want to expand, Laura? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I really agree with Tony there. This is the time to get HR leaders at the executive table. So there's so many organizations where HR is not on the executive team, the VP of corporate, whatever, but HR isn't there. And it's really time for HR to take our place and to show how valuable we are and to lead other executives in our own organizations forward. They really need us. We are the heart of our institutions, and we need to step up, as Tony said, and lead. And I'm excited about that opportunity. A little nervous at the same time, but change creates opportunity, and this is our opportunity to show ourselves as the professionals that we are.
I guess I'm forced to be not the naysayer, but the flip side of this is we had a question from one of our attendees. And I know we're wrapping up, but I still want to put a question out there because it's an important one in the context of this. Is they're saying in this environment where training and development budgets have been pretty much cut, significantly reduced, how do we take, and the question is interesting because we're talking about how do we support the training and development of our younger HR professionals? How do we help them move up, to be able to rise up to the challenges Tony has put forward. There is no magic bullet.
So I'm going to make a comment on that. I think if you look back at the last 9 months, what HR has done has proven its worth to align the needs of the business, the urgent needs of the business, with what the profession can do. What's also been highlighted is the importance of training and development of your staff, not only as a means of continuing. Let's take an example. I mean, let's just look at the remote environment. Lots of unofficial training and development went on to get people set up so they could continue to engage in work. That was done through HR. So HR was already there. You know, one of the things we often see is when organizations challenge, they tend to cut the training and development budgets. And I've always been advocate that that's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is in change. It's time to train. It's time to engage and move the organization forward. And I think that's really the voice of HR is being able to say, look, you know, here's what we've done. The case study is clear. The case study is that we can remotely, we can train and develop people, we can engage people, we can build culture, all those things that HR does such a great job of, we can do that going into the future. My one piece of advice to any HR professional is, whenever I have the chance to share this with them, is always understand the business of the organization that you're in and understand the value that you create for that organization. So that can translate through your teams and through your staff. If we do that, then I think we're going to emerge stronger out of this pandemic.
Thank you, Rod.
Yeah, I would just say, Carol, I know it was centered around human resources and the young professional, but I'd be just, you know, I think it's important to mention that organizations like ours, CPHR Canada, and the various provinces across this country, and also organizations like CIPD in the UK and SHRM in the United States, have offered a lot of free training, a lot of webinars, especially during this environment, where actually a young profession can go and seek this type of professional development for free, or at least for even very low cost. And I think we need to be aware of that, and our members need to be aware of that. So there's a huge opportunity that has been created this year because of this pandemic. And we understand as organizations that not everyone has the resources to be able to do so. So that is also an opportunity for members to get not only trained, but personally developed and stronger as HR professionals.
Excellent. So to my questions, what can each of us do? I think you're answering it. You're pretty much saying each of us has a responsibility for our own training and development, to advocate for training and development within our organizations. Manon, want to add to that?
Yeah, and understanding sometimes I think there's a misconception that training and development needs to cost a lot of money. I think, you know, not only the fact that Tony pointed out that there was a lot of free, very accessible quality training put out in the past months, but even so, I think in organizations sometimes, and we know that now the way people learn is it's, you know, shorter terms, shorter content, not so, you know, so many days sitting in front of a computer or in a classroom when we'll be able to do it. So I think it's not so much money that's invested, but it's making sure that we know what skills we need to develop, right? And that's a challenge right now. And I think that's where I see a lot of initiative from different government, different groups that are trying to put out what are the competencies of the future that people need to develop. I think I don't think there's clarity for a lot of workers in different organizations in terms of what do they need to develop to still have, you know, be relevant in the future. And that's the big challenge for HR. We're used to trying to projecting what competencies will be needed in 2-3 years time and look at the gap and develop that. But now it's like a moving target. The changes are so quick that it's getting harder and harder to kind of see what the future holds. But I think if I were to design those plans, is that what we need is to support the ability for people to adapt. So like learning how to learn instead of having very specific skill set, because it's harder to paint that portrait in 3 years. And again, I think with creativity, with intention, obviously commitment from higher management, I think training and development can happen and not cost fortunes. I think sometimes it's a misconception.
Merci, Manon. Any final words before we, I mean, we can keep, oh, Laura, yes, go ahead.
Thanks. I think we all have to reflect upon our own abilities to lead. So when Rod says, you know, trust and vulnerability are so important, we are not going to be able to say these are the competencies we're going to need in 3 to 5 years post-pandemic. I think we're going to learn them together, and we're going to work with our teams. And I think we have to accept, especially some of us who, you know, have traditional leadership roles, that this is going to be continuing to change as we go. And I think if we do that, and we put our trust in our people, and we understand what they individually need, we are going to produce the best teams in a hybrid environment, and those are going to be able to produce. And I think those employees will want to stay with us. So that's, for me, is what I think we need to do, is not have huge plans, because it's hard to plan right now.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to say as we wrap up that this has been, for me, very enlightening conversation, and from the comments that I'm seeing coming in from our attendees as well, very insightful. We're told folks have reacted, and we've had quite a bit of comments. It's been helpful, and thank you for sending those in. We weren't able to answer them all, but they've been seen and will continue to be looked at. I want to thank our panelists. I want to remind everyone that this webinar was recorded and will be made available on LinkedIn and on various social media platforms. We'll also be producing a short report, and so you'll be able to read our conclusions, our hopefully neutral conclusions. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm just going to turn it to Tony to conclude.
I want to thank you, Carol, for moderating this, and also my fellow panelists. Thank you very much for contributing to this very important conversation. And also to all the attendees, thank you for sitting in and asking your questions. And I know we couldn't get to all of them, but I really appreciate the time you gave to hear us speak about some very important issues with respect to our HR profession. So thank you, everyone. Continue to be safe and well, and I wish you well into hopefully what will be a much better 2021. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Be well.